What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Political Frenemies Budget Special. I'm Chris Newton. I'm an academic and a former Tory Defence Policy Advisor. Before I introduce our very special guest this week, I suppose I better say hello to my co-host, Lib Dem activist and former councillor, Mathew Hulbert. Hello, Mathew. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thanks, Chris. It's lovely to see you and our guest as well. I'm having a bit of a podcast evening on the Friday that we're recording this because I've just done our mutual friend Mathew Goodwin-Freeman's podcast, so that was a whole heap of fun. So I'll just hope that my voice holds up.
Yeah, well, I'm sure plenty of people will be waiting to hear your every opinion, Mathew, so as always. So hopefully your voice will hold up. Although I'm sure we won't agree with any of it really, or much of it. But let me turn to our very special guest this week. This week we have he's a property expert, a political commentator. He's a presenter. Many of you will have seen him present on Talk. And now he's also a Reform UK councillor. It's Russell Quirk. Hello, Russell. How are you doing?
Hi, chaps. Yeah, that's a lot of hats I wear, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, you're a man of many talents.
Yeah, thank you. Not everybody would agree with you, but I have a go. I like to be busy.
Yeah, that's definitely the best way of going about things. But before we get on to the main business, many of our listeners and viewers will know who you are anyway. As I've said, you've recently become a Reform UK councillor. So why did you make the move into politics? Why Reform UK, and why get involved in politics?
It's actually a re-entry, to be honest. So I was a councillor in Brentwood in Essex, where I live, between 2006 and 2015. So I was enthusiastically pushed into being a councillor for the Conservatives back in 2006 by Brandon Lewis, who was the leader of Brentwood Council at the time. And as it turns out, we had a kind of family connection going way back. His dad was friends with my dad back in the 80s. And so we kind of, started talking about the woes of politics and, the problems and challenges really facing Brentwood in Essex in particular. He had just become leader. I think 2 years previously taken control, sorry, Mathew, from the Liberal Democrats, much to the huge audible sigh of relief from the Brentwood populace. And so I did that for a period of time. I was chairman of planning. I was chairman of the Asset Committee. I ended up being pretty vocal, it's fair to say, surprise, surprise. Learned the trade of PR and I guess both the kind of white hat and black hat stuff around PR, so the dark arts including. And that kind of set me up for what I now do as a living, really. So apart from actually being quite active as a commentator and, being involved in property as I have been, formerly owned estate agency businesses and so on, I actually run a public relations firm. So PR is actually my business and has been for about the last 8 years. So what happened back in May, June, very, very sadly, one of the Conservative candidates in my ward, the ward in which I live in Brentwood, died. A guy called Mark Reed, lovely, lovely guy, brilliant community councillor. And I guess a combination of circumstances, that horrendous timing, frankly, and also the fact that I actually live in the ward. I'd started to get very friendly with the chairman of Reform Brentwood, a guy called Paul Godfrey, who I started to really quite like and respect. And we had a few chats, and he just said, look, it's pretty obvious that we're going to have a conversation about you being a candidate for Reform in the by-election, which is now going to occur and did occur on October the 2nd. So I thought about it, talked to my wife. She was absolutely opposed to it, so I did it anyway. What do they say about forgiveness? Easier to get than permission. And I stood and I won the seat, a formerly very, very safe Conservative seat, which kind of joining the dots back to what I said a couple of minutes ago, happened to be Brandon Lewis's seat up until the time that he left Brentwood to become an MP for Great Yarmouth. Then he became chairman of the Conservative Party, housing minister, and then, of course, Northern Ireland secretary. So most people would know the name for sure. So there's a real kind of coincidence and load of ironies there. So I think when I gave up politics back in 2015, I'd really fallen out of love with the Conservatives locally. They were, after Brandon left, they were pretty inept, to be honest. And I also had a youngish business and a young family. So I think my daughters at the time were only about, let me think, 6 and 7. So I've got 3 daughters, 2 twins, obviously 2 twins, and they're 6. They were 6 at the time, and the elder daughter was 7. So it just was the wrong time back then to really kind of pursue a kind of career in politics as such. Not that being a councillor is a career, but you know what I mean. And now, 10 years on, kids have grown up. Hardly ever see them. They're either out or they're in their rooms. The business is a very different business now, much more mature, kind of looks after itself, got great business partners that kind of do the day-to-day. So that's why I got back in. And also, honestly, and I don't think either of you are probably going to disagree with this statement, the feeling I have over the last 2 years, really, of the Conservatives, and particularly obviously now the Labour government, that the country is in peril. I mean, I truly believe it's in peril, socially, culturally, economically, in many, many, many respects. So I guess it was time to kind of come down from the terraces and stand on the field and be counted.
So can I ask you, I mean, Russell, I mean, obviously, you know, I first became aware of you because you know, at Talk, and they very kindly sometimes have me on, which is always a delight and a joy. How much of a consideration was it for you that, you know, obviously you standing for election and then being elected was going to have quite an impact on how much you could do with and for them? I mean, would that ever have been consideration as why you might not have gone for it?
Oh yeah, huge. I had to think very carefully for the 2 weeks, probably, I think, between the kind of conversation starting to be had about the by-election and then actually having to, you know, stick my nomination papers in and be the candidate and actually go through the reform process because, you know, I had to be interviewed, I had to apply to be a candidate, I had to be vetted. I was not unopposed, so somebody else also put their hand up to be the candidate. So there had to be a kind of interview stroke hustings process, which is absolutely right and fair. So yeah, there was a consideration that I knew that because of the Ofcom rules, which are stupid in my opinion, that as an elected politician, albeit just an ordinary councillor, just representing my home ward in my hometown, that, you know, I'm not allowed nor trusted by Ofcom to host a show that might include news, and in particular breaking news. So I had to think about it very carefully. I had conversations with Talk about compliance and what the implications were going to be, and decided that actually I thought that the principle of being, you know, a political spokesperson stroke representative for a party and for a cause was probably more important than earning, you know, I don't know, whatever, X pounds per show, X pounds per week as a cover presenter filling in for whoever, you know, Jeremy Kyle, Kevin O'Sullivan, Julie Hartley-Brewer and so on. So it doesn't stop me being a commentator, but it does, according to Ofcom, and this is all open to interpretation, it does prevent you from being a presenter if there's going to be breaking news. So, you know, if I were doing a 3-hour show for Talk one Thursday afternoon, let's say for Jeremy Kyle, and, you know, there's a train crash, God forbid, the rules state that because you're elected, you can't then on air say, breaking news, there's been a horrendous train crash in X, we'll come back to you with further details as we know more. I mean, it's ludicrous that in some way that is seen by Ofcom, the Ofcommunists as they're called by some, as tantamount to potential bias. I mean, it's just, it's censorship. It's ludicrous. Actually, I'm going to get me on a very quick rant here, guys. It insults the intelligence of the broadcasting, the broadcast public, the public that are receiving that broadcast, that they can tell the difference between bias and balanced output, I think. Particularly on a channel like Talk, which is actually not a news channel at all. It's, as you know, Matthew, it's an opinion channel. That's what it is.
Absolutely.
It's an opinion channel. That's why it's not called Talk News. It's just called Talk. Anyway, so yes, I had to consider that and decided to do what I think was the right thing anyway. And I guess, look, does that pave the way, if this is your next question, to other future political ambitions? Yeah, maybe. You know, I have put my hat in the ring for a certain other more senior role here in Essex. But to me, it's very vocational. I'm very unlike most politicians that want to be in politics for the sake of ego, power and money. My ego is already well tested, as Mathew, you very much know. So I don't need to worry about stroking my own ego anymore. You know, I've got a business. I'm on the telly and radio a little bit. I'm very happy. I've got a few quid. So, you know, I'm quite unusual in terms of my motives for wanting to be in politics.
And just one last question from me before we get on to the budget. So you've said you've been a councillor before, but obviously this time it's going to be a different experience, a different party. But you'll be seeing you have been sort of dealing with sort of other conservative councillors. So I don't know how involved that you've been so far, because you've only just been elected. But how are you finding it at the moment? You know, given that now that you're representing another party.
So I'm the only Reform councillor in Brentwood. I'm the first ever Reform elected councillor in Brentwood. There's only there are half a dozen in Essex, I think. Funny enough, the officers, the chief exec of the council have been very, very accommodating, even though I don't technically constitute a group. So they've been very, very welcoming, very professional. The politicians, the councillors, kind of not so much. There's not that they're not friendly, Chris, but they are desperately trying to clip my wings as much as they can within whatever they consider to be the interpretation of the rules. I'll give you a quick example. For some reason, again, stupidly, if you put a motion forward to council, which in any council across the country means that you can have that motion debated and voted upon, and the motion that I'm talking about here was very quickly was the following: that this council agrees with the premise of local democracy, accords with the Local Government Acts, and therefore supports, encourages and commits to having local elections in May 2026. That's my motion. I have to have a seconder. None of them, none of my 38 colleagues, none of them will second my motion. Not one Conservative, not one Liberal, Democrat, Mathew, Democrat, the clue's in the name, nor Labour, which I think is disgusting. But of course, they don't want me to have the advantage. They're embarrassed because they can't possibly stand up in front of the public and say, actually, we'd rather not have elections. The real reason, of course, they don't want to have elections, whether they're particularly Conservative or Labour, is because they'll get absolutely destroyed at the ballot box in May 2026. Actually, to the benefit of Reform, I hate to say, probably some Lib Dem traction, and of course some fellow called Zach Polanski that seems to have temporarily popped up. So yeah, they're not being very cooperative. They didn't want me to have a committee position, using the rule that is, well, you're on your own, you're not a group, and only groups get committee positions. So I've kicked off about that, managed to worm my way onto planning. So yeah, I haven't had a full council meeting yet. So that is in 11 or 12 days' time. I'm sure they'll be polite, but not very helpful. And they definitely want to, kind of hit me on the head, metaphorically and politically speaking, to stop me stretching my legs, shall we say.
And can I just ask one final question before we move on to the budget chat? I'm interested in your perspective, Russell, as someone who's, been a political commentator and is now an active Reform councillor. Would you agree that it's a fair statement for me to say that, Reform, obviously you guys now control a lot of councils, including here in Leicestershire, albeit as a minority here in Leicestershire. But would you agree that it's been a little bit of a baptism of fire for some of your councillors in terms of it's not always gone well, has it, the past few months?
I think that the answer to that lies in how the media and the opposition are desperately trying to discredit reform. Desperately. The fact that in Kent there's been some attention on what I see as a very clumsy attempt to get rid of the leader of reform in Kent that some reform councillors didn't like, but in a very, very inappropriate way. The fact that that has had national media attention for weeks, I think is pathetic, actually. I think to use that as an indication that in some way, reform are questionable in terms of their ability to run things. I mean, if you want, we can sit here for the next 25 minutes talking about instances of Lib Dem, Conservative and Labour councillors, council leaders, mayors, MPs, breaking the rules, being stupid, hitting members of the public, going to prison. I mean, where do you want to stop, right? Yeah. So I think, and I'm sure you probably don't want swearing on this podcast, but I think that the elite, the establishment, and definitely, council officers, media, and of course the Conservatives and Labour are absolutely crapping themselves, and they are doing everything they possibly can to throw rocks at anything they possibly can, even though that coverage, that reporting is completely and utterly disproportionate to the reality of how much those instances matter. On the other hand, so for balance, let me be really honest. Reform is only in its kind of current stance, its entity now, only 3 or 4 years old. It's still a start-up. So is there an element of it having to find its feet, particularly when it comes to running things, not just being councillors, but all of a sudden being thrust into power, wherever? Kent as a good example. Yeah, of course, there's going to be some teething problems, aren't there? But yeah, I think it's a huge distraction, Mathew.
Okay, thanks for that. And yeah, I'm sure. I mean, the stuff about how you've been treated. I mean, that's pretty much reflected in the House of Commons and how the Reform MPs are treated there as well. I mean, clearly, I would agree with you in the sense that Reform are making waves, and there's and the established parties are worried and are throwing absolutely anything, any kind of muck at reform, and we're seeing this, with regards to schoolyard comments and so forth.
But Chris, I'd go further. Labour and the Conservatives are fighting for their political survival.
Yeah,
I mean, genuinely. So, look, the next 4 years, a long, long time, of course. The Lib Dems will benefit, and I'll say this tongue in cheek, just because Mathew and I like to wind each other up. But of course, look. The left will be looking for a protest party that probably, if you're on the left, you're not, unless you're an old school Labourite that is kind of, pro-controlled borders and so on. But the Lib Dems are going to benefit from some protest vote, I think, over the next 3 or 4 years and in the run-up to the general election. But otherwise, when you look at the polls in terms of where Labour are, Labour this week have just lost a safe Labour seat in Sunderland. That's just happened to Reform by a huge margin. So I think the Conservatives and Labour, the uni party, which I think is completely and utterly broken, morally corrupt, vacuous and incompetent. I mean, we're seeing that in many respects. I think they're fighting for their lives, literally fighting for their lives. These guys, they're probably not going to get back into power, if ever, for the next 10, 12, 15 years because of the mess that these career politicians, these empty suit morons, frankly, the state that they have left Britain in.
And talking of that, we are going to be talking for the remainder of the programme about the budgets, because that is the key story of the week, and we are going to devote the rest of the programme to that. So we'll be discussing the budget, the key measures, and the political fallout over the past couple of days. So without further ado, let's do this. Okay, so Rachel Reeves has delivered her second budget and hopefully her final budget this week. Among the key headline measures, and there's loads, but I'll just pick out two or three, include income tax thresholds frozen for an extra 3 years beyond 2028, dragging more people into the higher bands, two-child universal credit cap scrapped from April. You've got a new mansion tax thresholds for properties worth more than £2 million. And ultimately, the overall result of the budget is to increase taxes by £26 billion. And it has emerged today, and we're recording on the Friday, that the OBR claims that the £20 billion black hole Reeves used to justify those tax rises doesn't actually exist. So there are lots of other measures, and I'm sure we'll be picking some of those up later on as we discuss this. But Russell, your initial reaction to the budget, your verdict of the budget, what does this mean for the British economy and for the government going forward?
Where to start? I think a budget that was kind of created in a sixth form common room somewhere. I mean, it was that ideological by way of it being from far left, really. The message that's been sent to ordinary hard-working Brits, hundreds of thousands of them, particularly those where you talk about the income tax thresholds being frozen. The numbers are that about 800,000 people now will be pulled into paying tax stroke more tax. So I think an assault on, I guess, the fabric of Britain, I would say, Chris, that, this country's formed on, hard work, entrepreneurship, and actually looking after people, whether it's immigrants that have a right to be here or whether it's people that have fallen on hard times from a disability point of view specifically. But we've ended up now with a situation where you've got people that decide to get up in the morning, what Reform are calling the alarm clock generation, that are now heavily subsidising people that don't want to work. And I think one of the characteristics here that we should really focus on, apart from the fact that, yes, she has raised an extra 26 billion over and above the 40 billion, by the way, in the November 2024 budget. So I think we're up to 66 billion extra raise from a chancellor that promised not to raise taxes on ordinary people. So that is now, I think we can categorise that as being a lie, because clearly last budget, this budget, no such thing occurred in terms of freezing the amount of tax. I mean, you can play around with words like thresholds versus rates, but the amount of tax now being paid by ordinary hardworking people is higher in order to subsidise people that basically don't want to work. And the real characterisation there, I think, is this lifting, the blanket lifting of the two-child benefit cap, which Reform actually have a policy on, which is that can be lifted for those that are born here, but not lifted for those that are not. It's something I disagree with the party on. I don't think that benefit regime should apply to unlimited amount of children for those that are having children and can't financially support them. I think it's insane that you would have children when you can't afford to support them, notwithstanding the fact that there are temporary circumstances, of course. But we've got a situation here now where the lifting of that benefit cap means that someone with 6 kids, instead of being paid benefits for 2 and now being paid benefits for 6 children, will receive an extra £14,000 a year. Something like 500,000 people on benefits are now going to receive another £5,000 a year each for sitting on their backside, some of them. And I'm not generalising that everybody on benefits doesn't deserve to be on benefits, but come on, let's take the point that now we've got 20 million people on benefits. 20 million of a population of 70 million, right, including children, right? So 20 million of the adult population of 35, 40 million. That is outrageous. I mean, talk about benefit Britain. We are bang right smack in the centre of benefit Britain. And here's the other thing. Here's a stat for you. we now have a situation where 53% of households receive more benefits than they pay in tax. Get your heads around that just for a sec. So the majority of people in Britain as households receive more from the taxpayer in benefits than they pay in tax. Now, apart from the moral outrage of the fact that we're propping up people that some, many, most, whatever word you want to use, people that don't want to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and work, financially, fiscally, it's completely and utterly unsustainable. It's ludicrous. It is absolute madness. And that's why now we have borrowed nearly £3 trillion in total as government debt. And the cost of that debt servicing is £111 billion a year, which is why Rachel Reeves had to put taxes up to ordinary working people. And then and look, I can go on and on and on, but look, then there's the business targeting. So targeting of entrepreneurs, targeting of business owners, imposing a minimum wage increase of up to 8% in a 4% inflation environment. Telling businesses that have grown and prospered where the owners were going to sell the businesses to their employees that there's no longer tax relief on that. National insurance increases for employers, which obviously happened in the previous budget. I mean, this relentless assault on the engine room of Britain. It's ideological. It's the politics of envy. It's playing to an extreme left-wing backbench majority, I suppose, for the Labour Party's perspective. But it's unsustainable. It's insane. I mean, and it smacks of the kind of Soviet Politburo to me. So you can see I feel quite animated about it, gentlemen.
I can see Mathew's kind of itching to respond here, but Mathew, I mean, he's right here, isn't he? This is a budget that's really sort of unfair and hard on sort of working people, would you say?
Well, I mean, I wonder who this budget was aimed at, because, as we've just heard, and as we'll no doubt hear from yourself, Chris, this budget certainly doesn't please anyone on the right, and I don't think it pleases anyone to the left of Reeves and Starmer either, because as much as, I, for example, and my party welcome the fact that the two-child benefit cap has been lifted, to see yesterday Keir Starmer's moral indignation in his interview with Beth Rigby of Sky, his moral outrage at the idea of children in poverty, and I share that moral outrage. But where was that moral outrage a year ago? If it's not right now that children are living in poverty as a result of that issue, then it wasn't right a year ago when he said during the election it wasn't affordable and he couldn't do this. So the trouble is that they end up pleasing no one at all. I agree with Russell insofar as this, that I think it was clearly a sop to the Labour backbenchers, and in a way, I don't blame the backbenchers. They have their set of views. They recognise that the government is weak. They're going to try and get the government to bend their way or to tap their way. And why wouldn't you, if you expect to be a one-term Labour backbench MP, why wouldn't you want to try and, you don't see any great long-term future in politics. Why wouldn't you want to try and persuade the government to agree with your way of doing things? So, I mean, I don't think it's pleased anyone at all. And, part of me can't help but think that it was just to save Starmer's and Reeves' positions until next May. But I do think it's only until next May, because I can't conceive of a situation where, Labour don't lose Wales for basically the first time ever, the first time in more than a century, when they don't end up as government in Scotland, because, the SNP, which looks as if it was dying on its arse, has been rejuvenated as a result of this Labour government, and is probably likely to be returned to government in Scotland. And Labour are going to lose council seats across England to Reform, and to the Greens and the Lib Dems too, and maybe even some to the Tories in certain places. I mean, I just can't conceive of a situation where Starmer and Reeves are not out after next May. So, yeah.
I think there's the ideology, there's the fiscal incompetence here, there's the how the numbers don't add up. But what do we think sorry, I'm asking questions here. It's your podcast. But what do we think about the deceit of Starmer and Reeves, where they said one thing in the manifesto and then went back on it in the November 2024 budget. Then the day after that budget, Rachel Reeves stands up and says, look, I've done my worst now. I've had to fill what we now know was a fictitious black hole back then. She's then come back in November 2025 and said, yeah, sorry, all that stuff I said about, not actually fleecing the ordinary taxpayer for more money, all of that stuff, and all the stuff that she's now done that definitely wasn't in the manifesto around, mansion taxes and increasing the rate of income tax to landlords, milkshake taxes, and so on and so on and so on. What do we think this now does for the perception by the public, who already saw politicians and indeed Labour as the lowest of the low in terms of the kind of the amoebas of the pecking order in credibility terms in British society? When you have your government that's only been in government for 15 or 16 months that lies and lies and lies and lies, what do we think that does for people's faith in politics and politicians?
I think, it's, as you say, the people's faith in politicians is low enough already. But this, this completely takes it to the floor, doesn't it, or beyond the floor? When you add to the fact that this revelation or this emergence today that this black hole didn't actually exist, I don't understand why Reeves, even this evening, is still in her job. Because if this was a Tory Chancellor or a Reform Chancellor, they'd be out.
Well, especially after the OBR leak, but also in the media rounds today, we've had I think Bridget Phillipson, Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer. They've all tried to defend the position when a journalist has said, "But you've broken your manifesto promise and you've let the public down. You've lied." There's been this kind of mad spinning process by Downing Street as to, well, technically, it's not actually breaking our manifesto, because what we said at the time, we used our words very carefully, is that we wouldn't change the rate of income tax. Now, they didn't say that. They actually said that they wouldn't put the ordinary working person in a position where they were paying more tax, right? So I think it's even worse than going back on their word and breaking their promises and lying, is that now, as politicians, the day after the budget, they haven't even got the humility to look down the camera and say, yeah, we did break our manifesto promise, because they're now gaslighting us within an inch of our lives by saying, oh, no, I know it completely looks like we broke our promise and tore up the manifesto, but actually, technically, it's like something out of The Thick of It or Veep or some Armando Iannucci written hilarious satirical political thing. I think these people should be prosecuted, not just fired. I think it's a breach of contract with the British people. If I tell someone in my business I'm going to do these three things and then you're going to do three things in return, and I don't do my three things, they sue me because it's breach of contract. How the hell can these politicians messing around with the economy and defence and immigration and crime, how can they say this stuff to us as a population and then literally 30 seconds later stick their fingers up at us and say, yeah, no, we didn't mean it. We're not really doing that. It's a blatant con. It's a breach of contract. It's fraud. They should be prosecuted.
And there's been another example since the budget, can you believe it? And again, I know that me and you two probably have a different position on the actual policy itself, but just bear with me for a second. So the government had said in the manifesto that the workers' rights laws that they were bringing in were going to be from the first day of someone entering into employment with a company. They've now, I welcome that. You two perhaps don't, but I would have welcomed that. The government has now said, oh no, No, that's not going to happen. It's now going to be after 6 months. of someone being in employment. So, I mean, again, whatever your position on the actual policy, the fact is the government said one thing in the manifesto and is now doing something entirely different. And it's increasingly my view. I mean, Starmer's got a record of going back on everything he said he was going to do when he ran to be Labour leader. Now, you might say, oh, well, people never entirely tell the truth when they're running for a leadership position. They always tack to what their party thinks.
How is that in any way defensible?
Well, I agree. I agree. It's not, but I'm just saying what people say. But I think I don't believe a solitary word that comes out of that man's mouth, and I think that is clearly a difficulty for someone who's only been Prime Minister for little over a year. I was saying on Mathew Goodwin-Freeman's podcast that I don't think I've ever known, well, short perhaps of the Liz Truss aberration, but short of her, I don't think I've ever known a Prime Minister and a Chancellor that are that incapable of communicating to the voters what they're trying to do. They're just awful.
But his explanations of things are transparently bad. Like you can see their bullshit from a mile off, and it's like a dictator. It's like Comical Alley, if you remember from the Iraq War. It's so transparently bad, but also there's this aggression as well that comes with them. So if you watch, for example, the Starmer interview with Beth Rigby, it was yesterday. I mean, he just looked like a man possessed. I mean,
he went
it's
for
just
it, didn't he? But
absolutely
how dare you question the fact that I've definitely lied?
Right.
Seriously. Look, I'm absolutely disgusted with it, and you can take, I suppose you can do two things as a consequence of all this. You can kind of do what some people do, is just throw your hands up in the air and say, oh, do you know, I'm done. I'm done with voting. I'm done with politics, which is exactly the wrong thing to do in my view. Or you can do what we're doing, which is to put pressure on, to remonstrate, to argue, to voice. Or you can get elected and try and do something about it, and humiliate these idiots. The problem is, of course, Labour are in power until 2029, despite the fact that they've breached every contract with the public of Britain, every single one of them, already in the first 15 or 16 months of their tenure.
Certainly lost the moral authority to govern. Sorry.
And guys, don't forget as well that they've done that on just 30% of the vote, right? And they have this massive majority on a feeble percentage of the vote for a majority government of this kind. And so I don't even think they can. Some governments, when they get into trouble, can fall back on being able to say, we've got this mandate, we have won this mandate from the people. But this government can't even really say that. I mean, let's be absolutely honest, and this is true of the Lib Dems too, we benefited from this as well, is that people were that sick of the Tories, they just wanted to vote for whoever wasn't a Tory, for whoever was going to become the MP in their seat that wasn't a Conservative. So, they can't even pretend that there was this massive mandate, this massive popular upswelling.
Yeah, it wasn't 1997. It wasn't a 1997 kind of political, cultural landslide change. You're right. It was much more. And look. Clearly, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves took advantage of that on the campaign trail, didn't they? They almost didn't have to do much because the Conservatives lost the election rather than them winning it. Yeah. Look, I think it's disgraceful, and it is everything I hate about politics and politicians.
Can I ask you then, Russell? So in terms of reform, then, I mean, I think you'll agree with me that this is the first kind of Nigel Farage vehicle, if I can put it like that stands a real chance of potentially becoming the government at the next election. But I do still think, and I know that he denies it, and you perhaps will deny it too, but I do still kind of think that I certainly still perceive it, perhaps wrongly, but I certainly still perceive it as a bit of a one-man band. And one-man person can't run a government, no matter who it is. So what does reform have to do in the next 3 or 4 years, from your perspective? And obviously, I'd hate to see a reform government, but from your perspective, what does reform need to do to look viable as a government next time?
So I don't think we can have it both ways, can we? You know, we want strong leaders. Keir Starmer is not one of them. Kemi Badenoch is not one of them. Arguably, David Cameron was, Tony Blair was. So we want strong leaders, but then when Reform has a very strong leader, we say, oh, it's a one-man band, right? So that seems to be counterintuitive. Look, their Reform is still a start-up. It has seen incredible growth and popularity over the last 12 to 24 months, for sure. I mean, look, is there a challenge in terms of needing 94 people to form a government? You know, 34 cabinet ministers plus junior ministers. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of talent you've got to find, right? But we are a long way away from that. And by the way, I don't think we should be doing that entirely through defections from the Tories. And that's maybe something you want to touch on in a bit more detail, particularly the Tories that were responsible as part of the previous government for the demise of that government and the country. But look, there are people at the top of the party that really should not be underestimated. I think Zia Youssef is incredibly impressive. Incredibly impressive. You know, as a politician and a political thinker, as an orator, you know, I think he's very impressive. I think David Ball is very impressive. I think Richard Tice is very impressive. I think Layla Cunningham is very, very impressive. And I hope that she ends up being the Reform candidate for Mayor of London. So, look, and I can tell you, right, if I heard someone the other day say to me, oh, yeah, it's because Nigel only wants the limelight. He doesn't let anybody else speak. Do you know, in my 3 months now as candidate and councillor in Brentwood, bearing in mind I do a fair bit of, you know, this stuff and talk and GB News, no one ever has texted me, emailed me or rung me and said, say this, don't say that. This is the line, right? There is no one. I mean, look, I'm sure if I said something really stupid, I get a tap on the shoulder, right? But no one is trying to control the comms from the party so that Nigel is the only one that is seen to be prominent. That definitely is true. But so, look, give it time. I'd also argue, Matthew, when I see some front benchers, whether it be the Tories or Labour, on doing the media rounds, and I see how pathetic they are. I mean, including Rachel Reeves, by the way, who yesterday, when she was grilled about this 3 pence per mile EV charge, the journalist said, how are you going to administer a charge of 3p per mile electric car? How would you know how many miles it's done? And they apparently, I didn't see the clip, but I've heard about it on social media. She then said, well, it'll be every year when it's MOT'd, when the car's MOT'd, and we'll get a record of that. We'll charge the owner. Well, cars don't need an MOT for the first 3 years. So she didn't even know. She didn't know that, right? So you've got some really unimpressive government frontbenchers and shadow frontbenchers. I think we should be focusing on them rather than whether, you know, there's a sufficient depth of talent within Reform. I can tell you at grassroots, I get asked to do a lot of speeches, believe it or not, guys, within Reform. So I've done 10, 12 over the last few weeks. I meet some really impressive people at local level, like really impressive, where I think, oh, I did a thing in Billericay this week, and I knew some people in the room, as well as there being lots of members in there that I didn't know. Part of my speech was, I think there's MPs in this room. I mean, seriously. So, yeah, look, give it a chance. But I go back to the point earlier on, which is that, of course, the left-leaning media, newspapers and particularly broadcast, supported by a biased Ofcom. So let's name the BBC, Sky, ITV, Channel 4 for sure. Of course, they're all out to kind of create a narrative that in any way possible can seek to undermine Reform. So, you know, bothered, I suppose, as we say in Essex, bothered.
It's in relation to the EV charge. I mean, I thought they were trying to encourage us to use EVs, and now they're taxing us for
Chris,
that.
don't tell Matthew this, but I bought one. I actually am an EV owner. I'm embarrassed to say. Look at his face. Look at Mathew Hulbert. What? Russell Quirk's got an EV. I have. I've bought a Renault 5 Alpine GTS, which is a hot hatch, but it's all electric. And I bought it because of the tax deductibility, because of the fact that obviously it's cheaper to run. No ULEZ, because I go in and out of London a bit, and no congestion charge. Well, Sadiq Khan has just removed the total exemption of congestion charge, so now EVs are going to have to pay some congestion charge, and now we're being charged 3p a mile. I mean, yeah, talk about EVs falling through the floor in terms of sales, but think about the companies, the likes of whoever, Toyota, Ford, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, whoever, that have geared up to manufacture a certain number of EVs because they were told to through legislation. Where now, because of all of these penal introductions, they're now going to sell less vehicles, they're going to lose money, and people are going to get laid off. I mean, seriously, that's the unintended consequences of this stupidity by government. Stupidity.
Yeah, it was never about climate change. It was never about the environment. It was always about money.
Ideology and the money.
And ideology. I think, thanks very much, Russell, because we know you've got to rush off now. But
I've got to run off to a rival.
Yeah.
I don't mind that. That's fine. And I've also got to run off to meet my and Chris's mutual friend Andy Chandler, who we'll have back on the pod again soon. Russell, thanks so much. We really appreciate it. You've been fantastic, as we knew you would be, and hopefully you'll come on again before the end of the season. Can I just say my usual thing, which is please do all the internety things. Please like, please subscribe, please tell your friends, please follow us on X at Political Frenemies. We're a growing podcast, which is good, but it's a very competitive, crowded field. So all the support that you can give us is fantastic. And we're back next week, aren't we, Chris?
Yeah. Thanks for watching us and listening to us today. We'll be back next week, and do join us then for another episode of Political Frenemies.